Right guys, welcome to Formula 1 News. Red Bull have given their perspective on this weekend's championship decider, and they are convinced that McLaren are feeling the pressure from Max Verstappen breathing down their neck. Whether that reflects in the strategy on the operations from the McLaren team or the performances from the drivers, there is no doubt that Max has put them in a position where mistakes may well be made yet again. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new. As always, we've got a lot to get into today, and we're going to start with a couple of updates. Firstly, from McLaren, this is going to be their livery this weekend. It's, well, velo, I don't know, it's some sort of like vaping thing, isn't it? But it is interesting that for the final Grand Prix of the year, where the championship will be decided and the donuts may or may not be done, this is the livery that they're going with, not the one that they've run the whole season. I don't really think there's any other special liveries for the Grand Prix. That is certainly interesting. We also have some confirmations as to which drivers are going to be on track in the first free practice session. This is Arthur Leclerc, and he will be taking Lewis Hamilton's car. So at Ferrari, they will have two Leclercs on the track. Pretty cool, to be fair. We've seen it before, I believe. And these are the rest of the names you need to be aware of. So these were all the names that did the free practice sessions in the various Grand Prix this season. And, well, this is what you'll find on the right-hand side. So the practice driver for the event in Abu Dhabi, car number 81, is Pato O'Ward. So we've seen that happen this season. Antonelli, because he is a rookie, and you can see the other rookies on here as well, they don't need to give up their seat to another rookie, but the other drivers do. So that has been the case for Max. He gave up his seat to Arvid Lindblad in Mexico. And if we look at Abu Dhabi, Pato O'Ward will be in Oscar Piastri's car this weekend. We will have Kian Shields, interestingly enough, in car number 14 of Fernando Alonso. That is a little surprising, and Jack Crawford actually is going to be in the other Aston Martin, which is kind of interesting on this particular weekend. So yeah, Kian Shields is an interesting one, because I don't even believe he scored a point in the junior formula, certainly not in F2. So yeah, there must be a fair bit of money changing hands there, I'd say. Ryo Hirakawa is in the Haas. That is something worth considering, the Haas-Toyota relationship, certainly when it comes to the future of Yuki Tsunoda. We know that he's a Honda driver, but also he's probably still the best positions Japanese driver when it comes to maybe an opportunity if Toyota continue to increase their control over what's happening at Haas. And Luke Browning is going to be in the number 23 Alex Albon Williams. So those are the updates for this particular weekend. We also have a couple of updates on the liveries for next season. Alpine will be revealing their car in Barcelona, Spain on the 23rd of January. So just, I think, after they're doing the private test in Barcelona. So actually the Red Bull guys, they're revealing their car before. Again, is it going to be reveal their car? Is it going to be just reveal their livery on a mock-up car? Who knows? The reality is they'll look rather different to this season. Cadillac have also confirmed when their reveal is going to be, and they are locking in on the fully American approach. Yes, Valtteri Bottas, he isn't from the Americas. Sergio Perez may not be American from the United States of America, but he certainly is from the Americas. And they're leaning into it hard. So Cadillac are revealing their livery as an advert on Super Bowl Sunday. So it doesn't get any more American than this in many respects. They're delaying it longer than they could do. I mean, they say the livery is set, everything's sorted from our end, but they're going to reveal it possibly in an advert in a halftime show. I guess that's the read between the lines here. And they'll kick off their campaign next season potentially with a bang. So it's going to be exciting to see what they turn up with anyway. Maybe some teasers or no teasers in terms of what their livery looks like on this particular American football, but we'll see in due course. So those are confirmations so far when next year's cars/liveries are going to be revealed. It's also worth discussing because the rule set is coming to an end. We've had 4 years of these regulations, 22-3 until today. Has it been a success? I think that's the conclusion, really. Now, you can look at this a couple of ways. Do we have, from a qualifying perspective, the closest grid that we have ever had? Are the qualifying sessions pretty sensational nowadays? Absolutely yes. But in terms of quality of racing, it's certainly been significantly better. Even in this era of regs, it has been better, but it was inevitable that it would go this way. Has this era succeeded? I would argue no. I don't think the drivers or the teams will be especially wishing for it to return. Look, maybe next year's regs are even worse, but comparing these regs to where we were even 10 or 15, 20 years ago, I don't think Formula 1 has gone in the correct direction. You can discuss the electric and all that component to death, but the reality is bringing back ground effect it made things very challenging from a suspension stiffness perspective. Obviously, the porpoising issues the teams have rather dealt with over time, but the flexi wings were effectively an antidote to many of the fundamental issues with these cars. Massive understeer in low speeds, potential oversteer in high speed. Loads of problems just from a fundamental car philosophy perspective. Absolute boats as well, right? Trying to go through some of these corners where you used to be able to take multiple lines, just not the case anymore. Huge cars, biggest they've ever been, heaviest they've ever been. I think moving away from it in the grand scheme of things is the right decision. And the racing quality that we have seen recently is not great at all. This season, in terms of the championship, is mega, but in terms of the quality of the races, there's not been too many classics. Maybe not that dissimilar to what it was back in 2010, but at least back then the cars were far more fun to watch. And also you can look at the distance between the cars, and maybe the credit for that belongs to the cost cap, the budget cap, rather than anything else. Even Max Verstappen I thought was interesting because he's dominated this rule set. He might end up winning all the championships, we'll see in a couple of days' time. But Max says these cars have not been comfortable at all these years. My whole back is falling apart and my feet always hurt. Physically, it's not been the best. When you do scans, they don't look good. And, basically just outright says it, that the cars are running very low and very stiff. Even Tombassis from the FIA said that themselves. So that's the problem, right? The drivers have suffered with this. But it's interesting to say that Verstappen has looked at scans and, he's young and healthy compared to Fernando Alonso or Lewis Hamilton, who have been around this sport for a rather long time. Speaking of Hamilton, they will alternate in a modified SF25, as we know that they're going to run a mule car for the Pirelli test a day or two after the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix in Abu Dhabi. That mule car is effectively a Monza spec car with as little downforce as they can possibly put on it, but maybe not too many changes will be required for the SF25 given the lack of downforce that car has. Not really a lack of downforce, just a number of issues with that machine. But they will try and make the cars as similar in terms of aero performance to next year's car as they can, so they can get the Pirelli testing done. Dino Beganovic is going to drive the standard SF25, so it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. Hamilton also gave some thoughts on the state of the media criticism around Ferrari. The reality is it's always going to be that way, especially if Ferrari aren't performing. Hamilton says that it's difficult for the factory. They get home to their wives have looked to the media and they see the media talking all this trash, and well, maybe some of it is justified and some of it isn't. Hamilton also says he has so many notes in terms of things we need to improve on. Whether that will be acted on, that is a different question entirely. But let's talk about this weekend's. Verstappen is fighting for his 5th world title. Lando Norris is fighting for his 1st. We know what happened back in 2021, of course, at this circuit in the title decider. It was certainly not short of controversy. And in addition to that, they have decided, purely randomly, I'm sure, that on Thursday, the 4th of December, that being tomorrow, at 1500 hours local time, the 3 drivers in the press conference will be Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri and Max Verstappen, all 3 of the title contenders. So pretty spicy to see how that goes, because yeah, they may be decent friends off the track, but when it comes to locking in for race weekends and Max Verstappen answering questions on what he might well get up to at turn 1, it's going to make things pretty spicy. Now, speaking of Red Bull, Isaac Hadjar apparently has a 1+1 year deal, which shouldn't be a massive surprise. Apparently he's getting €6 million, which is respectable for sure, but it's just rumours at the end of the day. Max Verstappen probably getting at least 10x that, but there are reportedly performance clauses that could result in a salary reduction. Of course, you could always get demoted or promoted, depending on your perspective of the Racing Bulls over the last couple of years. He also is going to be getting involved in the post-Abu Dhabi test as part of the agreement there. As I say, Yuki Tsunoda will be interesting to see what next for him. He is going to stay as a part of Red Bull for now as their test and reserve driver. He's had a decent enough Formula 1 career in some respects. And look, he will, if he doesn't podium in Abu Dhabi, I think be the 3rd longest serving driver ever in terms of Grand Prix without a podium result. So he's certainly, he's done his time in Formula 1. Maybe, as I mentioned with Haas earlier, there could still be some future there. Maybe with Red Bull, but you've got to think with Red Bull, that's a pretty outside possibility. Yuki, though, doesn't think he's been treated totally fairly. He said this: "Since I had an identical car in the last 3 races." Now, yeah, he didn't have an identical car for some time. Some of that was his fault because he crashed in Imola and that caused problems. But as he said, "I've always been within 2 or 3 tenths, and even in Vegas, consistently FP1 to FP3, there was multiple laps I was ahead of Max. I don't think within my seat others have consistently been able to drive this close." So, look, I think that the numbers don't fully do Yuki justice in terms of his performance in Red Bull. It certainly wasn't great by any means, but I don't think it was as bad as maybe it looks in some regards, although I'm sure there's a certain individual in the comments who may disagree with that assessment. Red Bull also messed up quite a few things, his tyre pressures in Vegas and all of this. They were often apologising to the way that things went on Yuki's side of the garage. He was often sacrificed from a setup direction perspective to try and understand what they could for Max, but they still felt it worthwhile to put Hadjo in the car instead. And Sergio Perez said not dissimilar things last season, and as a consequence of Tsunoda and Lawson's underperformance, Perez has got an easy opportunity back in the grid as well. So maybe the future could be the same for Yuki. Time will only tell. But yeah, 22 Grand Prix for Yuki. Alex Albon only got 21. Gasly got 12. And Lawson only had 2, as we well remember. But let's talk about the title fight, because Alex Plow was asked the question. Of course, he's in that legal drama with McLaren, which is pretty funny, on the state of affairs over at IndyCar. But he says that, yeah, if Max was in that McLaren, no-brainer, he would have won that title a while ago. Now, I think he would have won the title already. There's 2 reasons for that. If Red Bull had the McLaren, they would have not only executed better operationally than McLaren have. The disqualification in Vegas was especially unforgivable in many respects, but it's not like McLaren have been especially clean when it comes to their decision-making from a papaya rules perspective this season. Max would have done a better job than Norris or Piastri just because he's a better driver. How much better is a matter for debate, but I don't think there's much doubt that Verstappen would have got slightly more, at the very least, out of that machine this year than the McLaren boys have done. But also, because of the way that Red Bull run and the way that Max is, there would have been no second driver conversation, right? So absolutely, he would have won it more cleanly in the McLaren because he would have had no teammate, and Red Bull being in a position where they know how things work at Red Bull, whereas McLaren certainly want to go about things in a different way. And look, that's great for the constructors. Congratulations, McLaren. But from a drivers' championship perspective, if you want to win the drivers, the 1-2 dynamic is the best way to do it. And, well, McLaren haven't done that. They may still win anyway. They're still favourites to win. Lando's considered to be roughly a 72% favourite. Oscar has about a 6% chance, according to, I think it's like Polymarket and stuff, what the market says. So Max has a quarter, fifth of a chance, apparently, to win compared to the 2 McLaren boys. But, well, who knows if the pressure will get to the McLarens. The other Max story of the day is this. If you guys remember, at the end of the Qatar Grand Prix, Antonelli makes a mistake in turn 9, turn 10. Norris gets past, and, well, they went on to finish 4th and 5th, respectively, with Lando getting 2 extra crucial points in the championship. Now, when that happened, we didn't see the footage of it in real time, right? We only saw the outcome, and it looked on first glance like, well, I think on first glance, anyone reasonable thought, oh, Kimi's made a mistake and Norris got through. But of course, there were some other reactions. GP initially on the radio said, looks like Kimi just pulled over and let him by. He then cleared it up with Toto Wolff after the race. And then also after the race, Helmut Marko says that, yeah, looks like Antonelli just let the guy through. Now, as a result of this, and maybe not even as a result of this, I think that, yes, GP to a certain extent, and certainly Helmut Marko, deserve criticism for their comments at the time. But it was clear as day that it was a mistake for Antonelli as soon as we saw the replay, and frankly, I would say before as well, given the context of everything. There was a lot for Mercedes and Antonelli to still fight for there. He saw the podium right in front of his very eyes and made a mistake in the dirty air and the pressure. It is what it is. Plenty of drivers were having offs around Qatar last weekend. But even without Marko and GP's comments, people would still have probably sent threats, death threats, comments to Antonelli on social media regardless. So while I think that those individuals should have apologised, should have said something, which Red Bull eventually did a day or so later, it's not like it's only them who deserve criticism for this development, but apparently it was Max who pushed the team to apologise, which is interesting because, Red Bull don't really like to apologise, just as an organisation from a cultural perspective. But yeah, Max apparently told Marco, we know that he's got a good relationship with Kimi, and said, look, that was unfair, that was unfair. And this is pretty impressive, I think, from the Max perspective, just because it was also a pretty big deal for Max, right? Like, this means that if Max wins, Lando can be third and still win the title, whereas otherwise Lando would have had to been second, which is certainly a far more challenging prospect, especially because, let's be honest, Red Bull, I'm sure, are going to have some plans with Yuki Tsunoda. Let's not forget what happened back in 2021. Perez was left out very long with the strict instruction to basically save some tyres and hold up Hamilton as much as you possibly can, which he did a very successful job of famously. And if it wasn't for Perez holding up Hamilton, then Mercedes would have had a clear window when the safety car happened to pit Hamilton anyway and still come out ahead of Max if the race was to continue. So it was very important. I will also just quickly mention, because there's still a bit of controversy, well, there's plenty of controversy still, over that 2021 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, because do you guys remember where Sergio Perez finished the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix? If you don't, it's because he retired. In somewhat mysterious circumstances, there was a rumour, I don't believe this has been founded at all, and it's just a theory, but there was a rumour that Red Bull underfueled Perez's car with the intention that he would do absolutely everything to stop Hamilton. So, look, I don't know if they are going to do the same thing for Yuki, but just keep an eye on it this weekend, because we know that Red Bull in a championship decider are not afraid to use some tricks to their advantage, right? And it's not something that McLaren really have the ability to do. So Red Bull have commented on the situation, right? Laura McKees gives his perspective. Of course, Max, I'm sure, feels very similarly as well, that he has absolutely put the pressure on. And the issue is, when you're racing Max, you know that he is incredibly uncompromising, but also you know that at this point in his career, he is incredibly accomplished, right? As McKee says, there is an element when you're Max's competitor, having been on the other side of it, as of course he was a Ferrari and all that, there is an element where you just know that he never gets it wrong. This puts some pressure on you. He never gets it wrong. He never misses a start. He never misses a turn one. He may make contact at turn one, but he's very, very rarely going to make an error in terms of driving. He may make an error of judgment, Max, under emotional circumstances, such as in Spain. He is going to extract more out of the tyres than most people out there. This puts the pressure on. The team has been extraordinary at the strong executions. McLaren are certainly feeling it, right? And I think the drivers will be feeling it as well. That's the thing. If Lando's on pole and Max is P2 going into turn one, you know what Max is going to do turn one. And you've got to be sensible in that scenario if you're Lando, given the context of the championship. But yeah, wow, we'll see what happens. But Red Bull are very confident that they are putting the pressure on, and when the pressure is on, it's more likely that mistakes are made. From a pit stop perspective, could also be critical. I mean, we know what happens in Abu Dhabi. Untimely safety cars require key strategic decision-making at key moments. I know that lots of people are counting Piastri out of this because he would have to win and Lando would have to be 6th or worse for him to take the title. But, don't say anything is impossible as it stands. The standings are, well, not as follows, but they're 408 for Lando, 396 for Max, 392 for Norris or for Piastri. This is how things look, therefore, in terms of the permutations. So if Lando's on the podium, he wins guaranteed. If he's 4th, then he still wins as long as Oscar is anywhere. It doesn't actually matter. And Max is 2nd or lower. If Lando is 6th, then he still wins if Max and Piastri are 2nd or lower as well. If, let's say, Russell was to go on to win the Grand Prix or something, or Yuki Tsunoda. I mean, imagine Yuki was somehow leading from Max with a few laps to go, and he's like, do I yield to give Max the title, or do I take a Grand Prix win? It's tough to say. I'll let Max overtake me on the track, possibly. So these are the permutations for the respective drivers. There has been some talk about Mercedes. I don't think anyone is expecting Ferrari to be anywhere, but in recent Grand Prix, it's been pretty clear cut, really. It's been the McLarens and Max. I would expect that to still be true in Abu Dhabi as well. But who knows who else can get in on the mix? We know that qualifying is very competitive if teams make a small mistake. It's just, there was a time in the season where both Ferrari and Mercedes looked like viable threats to potentially disrupt the front couple of rows. that now is only down to Mercedes, right? Like, I wouldn't expect any of the championship contenders to qualify outside of the, top 5, probably really top 4 in the circumstances. And look, maybe Mercedes can put up a fight, given that their strengths in some of the lower speed corners. I think that their car should be reasonably well suited this year, but again, with Mercedes, it's always very difficult to actually say. We've thought that there have been circuits over the last couple of years that would suit them, and that's not really turned out to quite be the case. So, intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. I will say on the Oscar Piastri front, there's only been one result this year that if it happens again, Piastri would win the championship, and that, of course, what happened in Zandvoort. So that was actually Piastri's most recent Grand Prix victory as well. It's been a long time since he has been on the podium. But also another stat for you all, Lando has never won twice at the same circuit. Of course, he won in Abu Dhabi last year. If he changes that this season, he, of course, will be the world champion, and it would be quite the way to do it, given the pressure that is clearly on the McLaren boys this weekend, top to bottom in that team. So hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.